Hello, this is Marian, welcoming you back to the English Grammar course. After reviewing the past perfect continuous, the topic of our last lesson, we will be advancing on this journey by learning and practicing the future perfect continuous. So let's get started. We use the past perfect continuous for an ongoing action in the past that ended before another action or event started in the past. He said he'd been dreaming of me before he woke up. As with all continuous forms, we use the past perfect continuous to focus on the action itself, its development, its process, rather than its completion, its final result. The plumber had been fixing the sink for hours before it finally started working again. This sentence emphasizes the duration of the fixing of the sink, not the end result of it working. To form the past perfect continuous, we follow the pattern subject, had, been, present participle. Clearly, they'd been talking about him. Don't forget that we can contract the subject with the auxiliary verb had. To form negative sentences in this tense, we follow the pattern subject, had, not, been, and present participle. And we can also contract had not to form hadn't. We hadn't been talking about anything before you arrived. Finally, to ask questions in the past perfect continuous tense, we use the construction had plus subject plus been plus present participle. For example, had they been sending each other letters before they met? All right, it's time for practice. Can you fill in the gaps? Kevin had only been playing the bass for 2 years before his first performance on stage. Notice how we place the adverb between the two auxiliary verbs. We had only been exercising for 30 minutes when it suddenly started to rain. I'd been waiting 25 minutes by the time the bus finally came. Because she'd been studying so hard, my sister knew she would pass the exam. The teacher got mad because we'd been talking throughout the whole class. They'd only been traveling for 2 weeks and had already visited 3 countries. Wonderful job! Now we can move on to our last and final lesson on perfect tenses and wrap it up with the future perfect continuous tense. We use the future perfect continuous tense to imagine ourselves in the future looking back into the past. She will have been breastfeeding her baby for 3 years. We also use this tense for actions or state that extend to some specific event in the future. I will have been studying for 7 years by the time I finish my degree. This sentence means I have not finished my degree now, and it does not indicate whether I have started my degree yet or not. We also use this tense for an action or event that is currently not completed or finished, but will be at some time in the future. We will have been driving for 24 hours by the time we arrive tomorrow. With the future perfect continuous, we often use certain expressions of time. For example, by the time I arrive, I will have been traveling for 2 days. When I finish this course, I will have been teaching for over 20 hours. Now let's take a look at this chart. John starts waiting at 8 p.m. now. Linda will arrive at 10 p.m. in the future. John will have been waiting for 2 hours. He is not finished waiting yet. Note that the action or event can begin any time in the past, present, or future, but must always end in the future. For example, if John started waiting at 8 p.m. and Linda will arrive at 10 p.m. This means that now in the present, it is between 8 and 10 p.m. By 10 p.m., an event and time in the future, John will have been waiting for 2 hours. Similarly, if the action begins and ends in the future, we can use the future perfect continuous. John will start waiting at 8 p.m. and Linda will arrive at 10 p.m. John will have been waiting for 2 hours. So you see, as long as the end of the action, in this example, waiting, happens in the future, it doesn't matter when the action begins. We can use the future perfect continuous. Now, to form the future perfect continuous, we follow the structure subject, will have been, present participle. By next year, I will have been living in Lisbon for 10 years. When I finish my postgraduate degree, I'll have been studying for 8 years. All right, let's practice. Can you find and correct the mistake in these sentences? She'll be tired when she gets home. She'll have been studying all day. The only correct way to contract she will is by using SHE apostrophe LL, she'll. Next week, we'll have been dating for 2 years. The future perfect continuous has 3 auxiliary verbs: will, have, been. My dad is running the marathon tomorrow. By 5 p.m., he'll have been running for 5 hours. My boyfriend will have been driving for 3 days by the time I see him. We always use the auxiliary have, never has, with the future perfect continuous. The jury will have been talking for over a month by the time they come to a decision. Great work! Now, to form negative sentences in this tense, we follow the construction subject, will not, have been, present participle. And we can contract will not to form won't. For example, he will not have been driving for long. She won't have been working there long enough to be able to ask for time off. To ask questions, we use the construction will plus subject plus have been plus present participle. Will you have been drinking when we go out? How long will Louis have been working in the office by the time he retires? Great work! Practice time once again. Can you identify the grammatically correct sentence? She won't have been working here for 6 months before getting promoted. She won't have been working here for 6 months before getting promoted. The second sentence is correct. We do not need to contract have and been. One contraction in the sentence is enough. When I arrive for dinner, you will have been cooking for long? When I arrive for dinner, will you have been cooking for long? The second sentence is correct. We must place the auxiliary verb will before the subject in a question. By next month, for how long will you have been living here? By next month, for how long will have you been living here? The first sentence is correct. We place the subject between the auxiliaries will and have. I won't have been sleeping for 3 hours before I have to get up again. I won't have been sleeping for 3 hours before I have to get up again. The second sentence is correct. We only need the auxiliary verb will once to form this tense. Great work! Now it's time for our final activity of the lesson. Can you choose the correct sentence? How long will you have been waiting for me when I arrive? I won't have been eating gluten for a year by next week. How long will Laura have been studying for her exam? They will have been driving for 10 hours by this time tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll have been dating for 3 years. By 5 a.m., she will have been dancing for 10 hours straight. I'm sad. By tomorrow, we won't have been seeing each other for a month. Great work! It's time to move on to our review. We use the future perfect continuous tense to imagine ourselves in the future, looking back into the past. When I turn 25, I will have been living abroad for 3 years. We also use this tense for an action or event that can begin anytime in the past, present, or future, but that always ends in the future. If I start reading the book on Monday and finish it on Friday, I will have been reading the book for 5 days. To form the future perfect continuous, we follow the structure subject plus will have been plus present participle. By 6 a.m., I will have been dancing for 10 hours straight. To form negative sentences, we use the pattern subject, will not or won't, have been, present participle. I won't have been cooking for very long by the time you get here. And to ask questions, we use the construction will, subject, have been, present participle. Will the kids have been brushing their teeth better by their next dentist's appointment? And that concludes this lesson. Great work on all your efforts with the perfect simple and perfect continuous tenses. Next lesson, it's time to start learning about conditionals. See you then!